nevertheless is saying, you know, this violates every single principle that we stand for. So we must embrace the goal of ending the war in Vietnam into our goal of civil rights and economic justice as well. So with this message, this increasingly controversial message, King decides that he and others are going to launch what's known as the Poor People's Campaign. The idea is that they are going to organize a nationwide campaign, but also a campaign that will have international resonance, and that it will appeal to and borrow from what's going on around the world, and include in its goals economic justice for developing countries, as well, and global economic justice, as well as economic justice within the United States. The organizing for this campaign begins to take place again across the country, but also, very importantly, in cooperation with other major social movements of the day, with the Chicano movement, with the American Indian movement, which is also gaining steam at the time, with the National Welfare Rights movement, and of course with the anti-war movement as well. The basic event that they're organizing for is what's going to be a mass march on Washington. An occupation until their demands are met, and until the demands for what they call an economic Bill of Rights. An economic Bill of Rights for all is essentially what they're organizing around. Now, as you know, this is all happening in 1968. As you all know, I hope, it's March 1968 when Martin Luther King is tragically assassinated. He's assassinated, as a matter of fact, when, as part of this movement, he's in Memphis organizing and marching alongside of the striking the sanitation workers, who essentially themselves had been operating, predominantly African-American union, had been essentially working under lethal conditions, literally lethal conditions. So King's assassination seems to be a real setback for the movement. But in fact, though, they recover and they decide we're going to continue this movement without King, but we're going to continue this movement in his name. So by May, caravans of people, caravans of self-identified Poor People's Campaign participants are organizing around the country, from West Coast to East Coast and in the center as well. They organize these caravans to get on buses, thousands and thousands of people, to begin to converge on Washington, starting in May of 1968. I mean, just imagine that. This is happening across the country. It's happening across the country without the benefit of Twitter, and without the benefit of any other kind of, computerized social network. It's happening because of organizing that was going on the ground organizing. So as they converge on Washington, arriving by buses, and what they do once they get there is they build something that's called Resurrection City. I mean, think about that, Resurrection City. So think about all the resonance that Resurrection City has. Not only this vision of a new world, but with all the kind of religious invocations and spiritual invocations that they're trying to get across here. They organized Resurrection City in West Potomac Park. Anyone know where that is? West Potomac Park in Washington, D.C. Essentially, it is alongside the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument and Congress. And they essentially say, we are going to park ourselves here. We are going to be the equivalent of what Occupy Wall Street and Occupy Isla Vista is. And we're going to build an alternative city. They build tents. They build what they themselves call a shanty town, kind of saying we're proud of having to live in a shanty town. And they begin as well to organize all sorts of alternative services. They have an alternative health service there. They have an alternative governance structure there where they come together to make decisions based on consensus and to create strategies for how their action is going to work. And from using Resurrection City as their base, they begin a whole series of targeted actions over the course of the next 6 weeks. targeted actions that include picketing in front of the Department of Agriculture to draw attention to the fact that millions upon millions of people in the United States were going hungry every night. In this land of abundance, there was hunger throughout the country, and nobody was paying attention to it. So they target the Department of Agriculture. They picket in front of the newly formed Department of Housing and Urban Development to say we deserve a right to adequate housing for all Americans in the United States. They organize, and in cooperation with some allies in Congress, congressional hearings to raise issues and to draw attention to the problems of poverty and economic injustice, and they have march upon march upon march to draw attention to their cause. They stay in Washington, D.C. for a period of 6 weeks, in 6 weeks that included incredible rain, absolutely incredible rain, that threatened everyone, and that would have sent many other people just running and leaving. Now, what happens over a period of 6 weeks? And the other thing I should say is, despite rain and also despite the efforts of thousands and thousands of federal troops who were sent to make sure that the people living in Resurrection City at the time did not explode into something dangerous. Now, the police, unlike what we see is happening in Oakland today, did not resort to pepper spray and did not resort to throwing tear gas to control the crowds, but they were there as an ever-ready presence, essentially saying, "Don't go too far." Nevertheless, the Resurrection City occupiers remained, and at the end of the 6 weeks, essentially they ran out of steam, but not without making a certain number of gains. What they did not gain were two things they did not gain. Number one, the full economic Bill of Rights that they were asking for. Number two, they did not, at least at that moment, 1968, gain an end to the Vietnam War. And that is a shame. That is something we can look back and say that is a goal we would have wanted them to meet at the time. Nevertheless, here is what they did gain. They essentially sent the message that we are full citizens and we deserve the full rights of citizenship, just like everybody else in the United States. Just like everybody else in the United States who is not paying any attention to our plight at all. And we are not going to sit back in silence and just allow ourselves to be ignored over and over and over again. And we are not going to sit back in silence without demanding our full rights to economic citizenship. In that sense, they essentially expressed and claimed rights that people had been fighting for decade upon decade upon decade. Secondly, they actually did gain. There were certain legislative agreements that they came to, but more importantly, they helped to set the stage for a whole generation of organizers who as a result of that experience, that experience of a very self-conscious, multiracial mass mobilization around issues of economic justice and around issues of peace, went out into their communities and continued the work that was started with the Poor People's Campaign of 1968. And I have to tell you that many of those people are still working in their communities as organizers today. So if I were to say there's a message that comes to us from the Poor People's Campaign of 1968, it is precisely that. It is to remind us, and I think, again, I think this is something that people who are occupying Wall Street and who are occupying Isla Vista are discovering. It's that ongoing presence of organizers, that ongoing presence of efforts to build multi-class as well as multi-race coalitions is something that needs to happen at the ground level, and it needs to happen on a day-to-day basis. That is how we're going to make change in the United States. Thank you very much, and keep on